Our club's always been a forum for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to command attention to the issues of our time and inform the most relevant, compelling, and challenging conversations. Here we offer first-person access to dynamic political, business, and public personality.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the delay for the people joining us online at canadianclub.org. We had a bit of lighting issue, but now we're all lit, and our panelists are going to take to the stage, and we're going to get to begin. For the people online, my name is Colleen Kennedy, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Club Toronto, and we're really glad for everyone to join us today. Our events are made possible by the support of our sponsors, and today's is being generously supported by Agnico Eagle. We're very grateful for your support. Thank you. We also appreciate Canadian Bankers Association for their season-long sponsorship and for the support of Air Canada, our official airline sponsor. And Canada's Forest Trust Corporation has helped us reduce our carbon footprint of our entire season by planting a forest and stewarding it in our honor. So we are grateful to Canada's Forest Trust Corporation. And we regularly invite young leaders to participate in our events, and today we welcome students and teachers from Humber College and Toronto Metropolitan University. Welcome to you. We're looking forward to your questions. And for all of you, if you have questions of our panel today, we'd like to make sure they get answered. There are question cards on your table that you can write on, and our volunteers can pick them up if you just put them up in the air. And also for those of you joining remotely, you'll find a Submit a Question button to the right-hand side of your screen, and that will get to us and make sure it gets up to Karen. So, with that, I would like to formally introduce our panelists. First off, Crystal Abatasaway, who's the Senior Manager of TD Bank and the President of the Indigenous Professional Association of Canada. Krista is from Ondek Onikaning First Nation and the Chippewas of the Rama First Nation. In her current capacity as Senior Manager at TD Bank, Crystal actively rotates through various centers of excellence within the HR function. As the President of the Indigenous Professional Association of Canada, Crystal is at the forefront of redefining agendas and identifying innovative measures to advance opportunities and capabilities for Indigenous people across Turtle Island. Jamie Lickers, Senior Vice President of Indigenous Markets, CIBC. Jamie leads a team of trust and lending experts across the country who provide dedicated service to Indigenous nations, businesses, and individuals. She provides advice and guidance on Indigenous issues across all lines of the business of the bank. She is recognized as one of Canada's most influential lawyers and a leading practitioner in Indigenous law. Jamie is Onondaga and a member of the Six Nations of the Grand River. And Sarah Madanik, President and CEO of the Gord Downey and Cheney Wenjack Fund. Born and raised near the historic Métis community of St. Albert, Sarah is a proud member of the Métis Nation of Alberta and the Cunningham family. She is currently the president and CEO of the Gord Downey and Cheney Wanjak Fund, a national charity that builds cultural understanding and creates a path towards reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. A dedicated volunteer, Sarah currently sits on the national boards for the Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada and the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. And moderating today's discussion is Karen Restool. Karen is a vice president at Crestview Strategy. We are lucky to also call her a director of the board of the Canadian Club Toronto. She's a sought-after voice on Indigenous economic and governance reconciliation. Karen engages audiences across North America. Karen is Ojibwe from the Doquis First Nation. Karen, panelists, the Canadian Club Toronto podium is yours.
Thanks so much, Colleen. And thanks to everyone here in the room and online who's joining us for today's conversation. It's going to be essentially 4 old ladies jabbing away on stage here, sharing our insights. Sorry, the Golden Girls. Is that better? Does that make it better? All right. So in true Indigenous protocol, some of you may know that this is my way when I host a conversation, and it is about each of us taking our time to introduce ourselves to the room in the way that suits us, in the way that we feel and see best for the occasion. So we'll do a quick round of intros, and our esteemed guests will share a bit about their vision on Indigenous reconciliation in business, finance, et cetera, while they're doing that. So if you find that they're going a little wayward, aside from where I am and who I'm from, it's part of the act. They're not just going all elder and taking their time and telling a story. It truly is part of their introduction here today. So all jokes aside, Crystal, over to you.
Miigwech. So ani bojo Crystal Batoswe Nadishnakas and Dekamnikaning Danjaba Makwa Dudem Anishnabay Kwe Indao. So hello everyone, welcome. My name is Crystal Batoswe. I'm from Ondakamnikani First Nations. I'm from the Bear Clan. I'm a proud Ojibwe woman. I grew up on and off reserve, so I'm registered with Ondakamnikani First Nations, which is on beautiful Manitoulin Island for those that go to the north. But my parents, siblings, and aunties and uncles all live in Rema. So from the land perspective, I'm connected to 2 communities, 2 Ojibwe communities. A little bit about me, I do work at TD Bank. That's my 9-to-5 job. However, I wear many hats and like to volunteer a lot in extracurricular. So with that, I am the president of IPAC, the Indigenous Professional Association of Canada, which brings together professionals and youth to talk about careers, opportunities, network with one another, and professional development. I also sit on the Indigenous Advisory Council for TC Energy. I sit on Michael Garron's hospital board, and I also sit on Misway Beak Aboriginal Employment and Training Centre of Toronto. So all that to say, I'm not busy at all. But for me, I think as an HR professional, in my youth, I was looking at, highly motivated, really ambitious, and I thought, what thing or what objective could I kind of sink my teeth into? And so a lot of that came through, looking at employment and living both on and off reserve, seeing the disparities between the populations and jobs and careers and opportunities. And so I thought about, why is the unemployment rate so high, not just within Indigenous communities, but even in major cities. And so, that's kind of where I took my step into Misway Beak, was looking at kind of what are those systemic barriers, what can an employment training center do for the Toronto Indigenous community. And then I think a couple years later, IPAC was so interesting to me because it was looking at Indigenous professionals that, were less green, had been in careers in, multifaceted industries, and they were also having barriers to getting into C-suite, getting onto boards. And so when you think about the employee life cycle, you think, okay, how do I start? How do I get into these industries? But then also, what are the challenges once in? And so that's really my mission and vision, what I've spent a lot of my time outside of work and also inside of work. I think a youth told me last week that I was the original OG in terms of being an Indigenous recruiter, both at RBC and TD about 12 years ago. And what's staggering, or if I can say keeps me up or keeps me really involved, is that the conversation 12 years ago and the conversation now with Indigenous recruiters, with people in D&I, it hasn't changed. So again, I think that's something that we really want to address. And when we're thinking about reconciliation, organizations have done tremendous work and amazing work with thinking about their own reconciliation journeys and their reports. But I think to move the needle forward is looking at representation within your organizations, not just, I think, one of the terms that we use is this revolving door effect. It's very easy to get Indigenous people into organizations, into training programs, but they taper off, they go into other, they'll leave the organization essentially. So again, how do we keep bright Indigenous talent, for lack of a better word, sticky, and keep them into within an organization, within an industry, into C-suite, into leadership, into management roles. Thank you, Timugaj.
Thanks so much, Crystal. I can attest to her schedule. We tried to get together for a coffee a couple months ago, and we landed at 7 a.m. on a Sunday in Liberty Village. So it's a challenge. Thanks so much. Jamie?
I thought you were going to say you're still trying to find a date for coffee. So as Colleen mentioned, I'm Jamie Lickers. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Indigenous Markets team at CIBC. And what that means really is I manage two primary lines of business for the bank across the country. One, a team of commercial bankers that service Indigenous clients from coast to coast to coast. And the other team is a dedicated team of trust experts that manage trust funds for Indigenous nations across the country. And in addition to that, I consult on other lines of business for the bank, whether it's retail, business banking, other interests. I also am the co-chair of the bank's Reconciliation Action Committee and a member of the Inclusion and Diversity Leadership Council that I sit on with our CEO, Victor. Like Crystal, I have a few extracurricular activities as well. I just finished my term as the chair of the board for the Hamilton Chamber of Commerce, and I'm now sitting as the past chair, which kind of makes it sound like I'm expired or something, like past my best before date, but they assure me that it's an important role and I have to stay on the board for another 2 years. I also just finished a term on the advisory council for the dean at the Queen's School of Law, which is where I did my legal studies. And sit as a community trustee for the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation Community Trust and on the advisory council for the National Aboriginal Trust Officers Association. So I'm a little bit busy also, but really happy to be here with you all today. And I sort of took a different journey to get to where I am today with the bank. I spent about 12 years in private practice at a big national Bay Street firm. I see some of my colleagues from the firm are here today. It's nice to see you guys. Practicing in the Indigenous law space, and so I sort of joke that I'm a recovering lawyer, although I don't think you ever fully recover from being a lawyer. But that skill set has actually been quite beneficial in my transition into my career in the financial space. There's a lot of people at our financial institutions in Canada that are excellent bankers, and they bring that mindset. But that doesn't always allow you to look at issues, particularly when you're serving diverse client segments or underserviced, underrepresented client segments. Sometimes that mindset isn't the mindset that helps solve problems or think outside the box or evolve the way that you think through issues and challenges and serve clients. And so what I lack in knowledge as a banker, not being a career banker, I hope I make up for in sort of a broader perspective on Indigenous issues in Canada, including Indigenous legal issues. And so that's a bit about me. I grew up in my home community of Six Nations until I left to go to university when I was 18, and my family's all still there, and we're very close with our community. I live in Hamilton, so it's nice to be close by Six Nations, but it's great to be here with you.
Thanks so much. Welcome. Sarah.
Tante, hello. I'm Sarah Medanik, and I'm a member of the Métis Nation of Alberta. And I'm so eager to jump into this conversation. You know, you heard my bio, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but I will say that it is a very interesting time to be a proud Métis within the current conversation of identity politics, Indigenous representation, who's Indigenous enough, who gets to decide what that looks like within a corporate context. And so within the context of reconciliation on Bay Street and having this incredible room here today listening, I'm really excited to have this powerhouse panel here to chat through some of these issues because it's very topical. I went to a number of EDI conferences, I speak all the time, and these conversations are the same. And so I know that people that showed up today and paid money to hear us speak are probably leaning into this work. You're wondering, you know, is there progress being made? Is this, you know, something that we can invest in a meaningful way? How do we get, you know, buy-in from C-suite to really support these initiatives? Does EDI properly represent what reconciliation means for our organization? And so I think, you know, to summarize that in the 30 seconds I probably have left, is there's so much work to do. And what I am so fearful about and why I'm so grateful everyone is here today is that in an ever changing environment, and you know, when the Gord Downey and Chani Wenjack Fund began 7 years ago, you know, it was really created out of the momentum of the 94 calls to action, you know, people saying we want to support reconciliation, but we don't know what to do, we don't know where to start. And you know, now we're in over 8,000 schools in every province and territory, and we help support our legacy spaces and our corporate partners do that same work. But there's been a change, you know, there's a real change in momentum around, you know, bodies being recovered from residential school sites. And people couldn't look away. They couldn't turn from the true history of Indigenous people in this country. And what that resulted in was, you know, I would say a tidal wave of acknowledgement and momentum where we're invited to speak at the Canadian Club of Toronto. You know, we're invited into corporate spaces. There's greater representation of Indigenous people on C-suite corporate boards and, you know, within organizations. But as, you know, as we make progress, there's always sort of a period of retraction. And in the ever-changing climate of polarization and politicization, my biggest fear is that there will continue to be pullback, and all the progress and really positive work that we've done and the changes that we've been implemented, fear will fill in those cracks once again. And so people really need to be brave. We need to keep having these conversations, and we need to lean in.
Awesome. So on that DI point, I just like to point out, you know, how there's a lot of rage on and critique on people who host manels. We've all heard of manels, where it's all men on stage. Well, in this case, I did not actually go out to find 3 women to sit on stage with me. I actually peeled through my black book to find who would be best suited for the conversation today. And naturally, it arrived at 3 women. So we're happy to bless you with a womanal this afternoon. Happy to be here. Yeah.
I've never heard that expression before, but I'm using it from now on.
So a little bit about me. I won't go into my bio. Check it out online if you want. But of note, I come from a very small but mighty First Nation community in northeastern Ontario on a river called the French River. Obviously not its original name, we're working on that. Beautiful area to visit. We're open to visitors, tourists. It does remain one of our main economic drivers today. But I share that because our story is one where we have always prioritized our economy, and as a result, we have enjoyed a strong social fabric over time. And as, you know, I won't say how old I am, but as I go along in the years through my career, I recognize that the way that I grew up and the people that I come from and who were around me as I was growing up have really shaped that kind of like hustle, entrepreneurial spirit that lives within me. And I grew curious around, you know, what other experiences Indigenous people were having growing up in other communities across the country. And that is in large part why I do the work that I do at Crestview Strategy. In a nutshell, if you look at my bio, you'll be very entertained. You'll be like, oh, she was all over the place. But what it doesn't say is in each role that I've held, I've tackled some pretty big challenges. The bigger the problem, the more I get excited. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm pleased to be here, not only with you, but with everyone in the room here today. So please make sure if you have comments or questions, Colleen does go around with the team and collect them. Those of you who are online, there's an area there to drop in your questions. They will make themselves to me, and we'll have a great conversation. So we'll start with you, Sarah. You mentioned that you were 7 years at the fund. Mm-hmm. It has for mandate to bring together, you know, Gord Downie was, you know, I think we all remember that moment where he stood on stage in those final acts and made that commitment. You have that mandate to bring together Canadians in corporate Canada and Indigenous peoples and communities. In the time that you've been in your current role, which it's on Bay Street, right? Your office is right here downtown Toronto. Have you observed any transformations? Like, what have you heard? What are you seeing? And do you think we're headed in the right direction?
For sure. So first of all, we don't actually have a formal office. And for anyone who's seen us in Union Station, that's one of our legacy spaces. Oftentimes partners will be like, we knocked on the office and no one let us in. But it's allowed us to do some really
How apropos.
Yeah. But we have amazing partners that let us share their space. And I think that's, you know, testament to the changing work environment. And, you know, one of the big things that we've really seen is that flexibility with partners to say, okay, could we possibly look at expanding our relationship with a, you know, a charitable partner to having them hot desk in our very corporate environment? And the answer is yes, and that is a result, a direct result of progress being made within the reconciliation space. Now, what I will say is this work takes time. It's, you know, we're talking about systemic change, and it takes time to work through large organizations. And so one of the things that I think Downie Wenjack has done really well is been able to leverage, you know, the partnership and the relationship to help guide those actions of, okay, what does engagement with community look like? What does engagement internally look like with our stakeholders? How do we bring that together to even begin considering something like a reconciliation plan? And what does that mean for us within the greater context of our EDI commitments overall and who we are as a company and our values? And that takes time, and it takes commitment, and it takes great, bold, and brave leaders, because we've all seen the backlash when, you know, you make a partnership or a commitment or take an action that you thought was going to be really positive, and then you get canceled by social media because it's vicious out there. Then, you know, the next year comes around and it says, you know what, we're not going to do anything because we really got burned last time. And we can't operate within that place of fear of taking action. We need to make sure that we're owning the mistakes that we made on this journey. It's not easy. We're talking about breaking down systemic racism, oppression, continued acts of genocide and perpetuated harms. These are not things of the past. They're still things present in the way we live today as Indigenous peoples. And that's something that we need to center in our work within the greater context. And there's progress being made, and there's hope in every action that big corporate partners take, that individuals take, that when your kids are learning in school the true history of Indigenous people. That is progress. But is it enough? Is it fast enough? You look at the barometer with regards to reconciliation, and how many calls to action have been answered? Who are we holding accountable for that? Is it our responsibility as an Indigenous people to champion that? To, crusade and shake down the chandelier, I don't know, the room, and you say, listen to us. We've been doing
These
that.
are some really nice chandeliers.
That would be pretty fun, actually. Or is it, do we need those allies? Do we need those people in positions of power to say, yeah, you know what? We messed up, it wasn't pretty, or you know what? We haven't done enough. We haven't actioned that yet, but we're gonna. And we need you to stay committed, because it's not gonna happen on a election cycle. It's not gonna happen on a strategic plan cycle. It's gonna take decades to implement real change. And hopefully everyone is committed to that journey. But I will say that progress is being made, and we can see it. So stay on the path with us.
Yeah, I'll go to Crystal and Jamie in just a moment, but I'm hearing you talking, and I see this kind of visual of a door opening to Bay Street, essentially, and us, walking through that door and making the most of it, recognizing that there are, biases and challenges and obstacles to be where we have to rearrange the furniture, so to speak, to ensure that we're part of the conversation. So necessary. Thank you. Crystal, Jamie, any comments?
Yeah, when I think about walking into banking, I stumbled in. I was applying to, at the time, RBC had a bursary program, and I applied, and at the end of the application it said, would you want to work at one of our branches during your summer months? I didn't even know what branch meant. I was like, sure, no problem, I can work in a branch. And when the recruiter called me, I was actually turning down the opportunity. I was taking finance and accounting in my undergrad, not doing so hot in those subjects, and immediately my unconscious bias was that you had to be really good at math, and so on and so forth. And then all that to say is, I'm just so thankful. The recruiter at the time, while I was turning it down, she was like, you're bubbly, you have great communication skills, you'd be great at sales. So she saw what I didn't see at that time. And so, I think about it now, 12, 13 years later, I've had an amazing career in finance. So much so that I'm gonna be graduating, convocating in 2 weeks, and I did my MBA at Western University. Woo! And again, so yeah, I think about it, just stumbling in, and it's just been a rewarding career. And that's, I just want so many more people to understand that it is a great opportunity, it is a great career. And I just think about nature versus nurture as well, of, you think about what your parents do, and then you think about what your aunts and your uncles do, but if no one works in banking or in finance, you don't necessarily think about that as a career, and then you don't take it in your education. And so what I had been doing for a number of years is going to First Nations communities and talking about my story and saying, it's okay, you don't have to be good at math. And talking about wealth management, talking about business bank, and all these other amazing careers that you can have in HR as well. And so I think it really turned a lot of heads to say, I never thought about a career in banking, but now I do. And to go back to the question on progress is, I sometimes get LinkedIn messages every couple months where someone says, you came to my community and I work at CIBC, I work at RBC, and I think that to me is progress as well, is more people thinking about careers that they potentially didn't know about, and having really fruitful careers as well.
That's a really good point. When I told my family I'd applied to go to law school, they said, why? You have a really good job already. Why would you go back to school? Because there was a mentality, you get a job, you work your 25 years, you get your pension, stability, predictability, you grow your family. But to the point that you're making is that when I stepped into law school at Ottawa U, I didn't know that would be the door opening to so much more. Connections, opportunities, fun projects. Yeah, you really do never know. And I didn't have anyone who'd gone to law school in my family. Another one of your points is that it's hard to see yourself when there's no one around you within your hug range that is doing those jobs. But that's the power of imagining the what could be. Mm-hmm. All right, we'll move over to you, Jamie. You spent pretty much your entire career on Bay Street. Maybe not
my friends
literally.
Call me Bay Street.
They call you Bay Street.
My Indigenous friends, that's my nickname.
Lady Bay
when
Street, I love this.
Yeah, that's funny.
So in your time, what have you observed? You don't have to get into specifics, but what are you seeing in terms of what finance, law, Bay Street could be doing better moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, that's such an important question, and I've worked at a number of large institutions throughout my career, 2 national Bay Street law firms, and now one of Canada's largest financial institutions. And it's funny, I'm a bit of an anomaly amongst my Indigenous professional friends in that I actually feel at home in these really big institutions, and I don't know why, but a lot of Indigenous people don't feel welcome, don't feel accepted, don't feel they can be themselves and thrive and excel in these large non-Indigenous institutions, and I feel most at home there. But I think we are making progress. We had the great fortune of working with Sarah and her organization. CIBC has a beautiful legacy space in our new head office, which is at CIBC Square. Gorgeous room that was developed in true partnership with Sarah's organization, but also with meaningful engagement with Indigenous communities who call Toronto part of their traditional territory, that incorporates elements of their culture, their traditions. So in the room, you'll see elements of Haudenosaunee longhouse design. Most of the materials used to construct the room, including the stone, the tile, the lumber, all sourced from Indigenous-owned communities and Indigenous-owned enterprises. Designed by an Indigenous architect who worked in conjunction with the main architect for the whole CIBC Square, which I understand is not an easy thing to have 2 sort of architects of record on one project. The ventilation system was designed separately to allow for smudging in the room for client meetings and other events, which is also not the easiest thing to do. We don't want to be smudging in our legacy room and have all of the sprinklers go off in the entire building while you're meeting with clients. It's not ideal.
It's a way to get noticed.
It's one way to get noticed.
One way.
But I mean, look, that it's a very visual symbol, I think, of our commitment to reconciliation at the bank. It's also a recognition of the legacy of some very harmful periods in the history of this country, harmful legislation that has had lasting effects on our communities. It's important to acknowledge that. Now we're working on CIBC North Tower, and I don't want to spoil it completely, but we're continuing that conversation into the North Tower as well. But the space in the North Tower will be much more forward-looking as opposed to backward-looking. So rather than focusing on reconciliation for past harms, we are looking to the future about all that is possible when we talk about economic reconciliation, sort of celebrating some of our clients and the achievements they've made and some of the relationships that we've built that have allowed us to support our Indigenous clients in their vision for their communities. So sort of looking forward and celebrating the progress. So I'm really excited about that. But I also think to Crystal's point as well, someone said to me early in my legal career, because I, like Karen, like you, I don't have any lawyers in my family, and yet I grew up with this idea that I wanted to be a lawyer. And people would ask me why that was, and I could never really explain it, just the same way I can't explain why I feel at home in these large Western institutions. But it's generally the case that if children can't see something, then they can't dream of doing it themselves. And whether that's being a doctor or a lawyer or working in a bank or having a career in finance or going to university, if they can't see it, if they don't grow up seeing it, that's not going to be what they dream about. And one of my most important initiatives that I'm working on at the bank right now is increasing our Indigenous representation throughout the bank generally. And that doesn't just mean finding people who want to work on our Indigenous markets team and serve Indigenous clients. That's what I want to do. I find that very meaningful work for our communities. But I want Indigenous people in our HR department. I want them in our tech department. I want them in our marketing department. I want them working for the office of the CEO. I want them everywhere. Until we have 3% or whatever the current number of Indigenous representation amongst the population is, until we have 3% of all of our CIBC team representing Indigenous people and communities under all lines of business in all departments, then I think we still have work to do. And I tell our clients, and when I speak at events where there's Indigenous leadership in the room, my ask of them is that I need your help to do that, because our young people aren't thinking about these careers. They're not dreaming about these possibilities. And so I need them to do what our communities did back in the 50s when it finally became legal for Indigenous people to hire lawyers. They encouraged their people to go out and get educated and become lawyers so that they could advance their own Indigenous rights in the Canadian court system. And now, I'm so proud to say that we have so many bright, successful Indigenous lawyers across this country. I sort of joke that you can't swing a stick without hitting an Indigenous lawyer. But I couldn't, I would hit Karen. But that is a fantastic place for us to be, because it's not where we were even just a few decades ago. And I don't want to be sitting up on a stage like this in another 10 years. I want to be able to say the same thing about Indigenous people in business and finance. That is my mission.
Yeah, on that point. Yeah. That's a really good point. Our communities have been builders forever. You know, that's my community story. It's the story of many communities across these lands, is that we have been in business and trade, and there was a period of time where that was stifled by really bad policy. So when people ask me, why do you care so much about policy? Because I've seen in my own experience, as we all have here, what it can do in terms of limiting dreams and limiting possibilities and limiting opportunities. I see in the crowd my friends from First Nation Major Projects Coalition. They are working with communities. I saw someone wave, yes, hello. They're working with communities to enter into partnerships with industry across the country and preparing for, just reflecting on when I was preparing for another talk, looking up the stat that I think you guys would also find interesting. In 2016, I remember looking up this stat. There's 167 First Nations involved in resource development projects. That's out of 634 in 2016. Today, when I recently checked it out to see if there were updates, we're at over 2/3 of the 634. Wow. So when we talk about, you know, where things are going, as Jamie just did, and what it's going to take to get there, and how we're preparing that next generation to lead, we've got great momentum here, and we're just going to keep building on it. Now, we need to retain these people. We have what I call a people person here with Crystal. People are your thing. So as an HR professional, any tips for the room in terms of retaining the talent that they're bringing through the door?
So yes, I'm going to give probably Cole's notes high level, but what I want to say in the beginning or the front of the conversation is we need to have a longer conversation with each and every one that's in a different organization, because it's hard to just give general advice when I or we don't understand where you are in your own inclusion journey, reconciliation, what's your data look like right now, where are your people, where are your bright Indigenous talent? Are they entry level? Do you have people in mid-management, leadership roles? And so that's to start. But when I think about recruitment, retention, is that I've seen consistently from industry partners is that it's a revolving door effect. And why that is can be many different things that I'd have to understand a little bit more about what it's like to work in your organization. Do you have an ERG? Is it active, or is it just another pillar that you say is just an organization where people can hang out, but are they actually hanging out there? Are they actually networking with one another? Are there professional development opportunities if they are to engage in an ERG? Thinking through, going back to kind of being the best place to work. What are your HR policies around maybe racism, or when you get into harmful discussions with people that might not have, might have said something in a meeting that could be wrong or harmful. And also like where you are in your training and learning development. So a lot of people, I think a couple years ago, a lot of industries rather, did a lot to train their staff, but was it mandatory? How many people participated? Do you have frequent conversations around Truth and Reconciliation Day or of these other days of note? Would be some of the questions I'd ask. Because that really will start to paint a picture on I think where you land in representation, and also where you see the people within that organization. Now, when I think about retention specifically and HR is, when I think about succession planning, that usually happens at the top of the house. So title officers, maybe senior managers and upwards. So if you have no representation of Indigenous talent in senior management opportunities, they're not a part of the conversation, they're not a part of the training and development opportunities, they're not getting the critical experiences they need, maybe not the sponsorship, maybe not the mentorship. And so I guess to solve for that in a quick synopsis of 30 seconds maybe, is potentially making a mini talent management program specifically tailored to your Indigenous representation or to your talent. But again, a lot more conversations I think need to be had because it's a process, it's a journey, and it's not something where you're like, okay, if we don't have anyone today, then we need to do some headhunting, or we need to do strategic sourcing to get more people in leadership roles. And recruiters, and I think sourcers, might have a hard time doing that because they don't have the skills potentially, or the resources to use those tools. And so when I think about LinkedIn, do they know how to Boolean search? Do they know what organizations they can look at members that are in that group? And then I think the last point is just we're not a homogeneous group. So again, it's not just one strategy, it's multiple strategies to cast a wide net. So you think about, there's obviously 3 designated groups, but again, you have Indigenous people that have lived in a major city their entire life. You have Indigenous people that have lived on community their entire life, may have came out to get post-secondary, may have returned, may also now live in a suburban city. And so these are things that you have to be consistently thinking about when you're thinking about recruitment strategy. Is it's not just going to be, we do this one thing and then we'll get the masses into our organization. It's about really looking at your employee value proposition when you're thinking about Indigenous talent. It's also about not just talking the talk, but walking the walk, is saying, in a year from now, when you're building, is like, yeah, we actually do have a retention strategy. We do have a succession plan for our Indigenous talent, and this is what it looks like, and these are the people that have been in it. We also have a sponsorship program, and this is what, how many people have gone through that program. And so that's a really long-winded answer, but I hope that gives you tidbits of things to kind of take away to your organizations. But know that you're not alone. There's amazing NGOs and I'll plug in quick, Misway Beak Aboriginal Employment Training Center, IPAC. We have membership, we have lots of programs and services. We have people that have the knowledge that can train your recruiters, train your sourcers on how to find talent. And so don't think that, it's never been done. It's absolutely been done. Banks have been doing it for decades. And so again, I think these aren't new concepts. It's just about teaching, I think, HR working through policy and doing kind of the good work in that way, and then it'll come together in time. I believe it will, and I think we believe it will.
So I'll share another side note that came to mind. My family, my ancestors at one point were very profitable guiding for tourists in the area. And as you're talking, I'm like, there's a whole generation of Bay Street guides, essentially, is what you're proposing, is to reach out to people like you and others who are able to provide advice and coaching on how to navigate bringing Indigenous people into the workforce, retaining them, and really situating them in positions of leadership so that we can reposition things and get ourselves on a good path forward. So thank you for that. I'm going to get the hook after this last question. Actually, she's very gracious. We're going over time by 3 minutes.
Yeah, I saw the warning.
So one final question. I know there's a lot of folks here who are keen to hear on how to partner with First Nations, or how to go out and procure, services from an Indigenous business, or, essentially that relational engagement aspect of, economic reconciliation, which is the buzzword today. What are your thoughts on that for the room and the folks who are joining us online today? Who wants to go first? Sarah?
Sure. I would say you still have to do the work internally. So you have to make sure that you're ready to partner in a good way. And that might mean reviewing your procurement policies and practices. That might mean building relationships within the communities that you work. If you don't have relationships with the communities in which you work, you absolutely need to start there and build out those relationships before, making a phone call on the week before you have an event and expecting someone to show up. Indigenous peoples and communities, people in general, we're trust-based. And, trust is earned, it's not purchased. And demonstrating that commitment over time, making sure that, you're a leader within your industry or sector. And, if you don't know where to start, if you haven't started that work internally, that's okay. That's literally what our Legacy Space program does, is try to take away the fear and break down that process so that it's easier to action and mobilize. But I will say, there is sort of, the buzzword of economic reconciliation. And it's like, you can't just immediately jump to that place where, you're on a 51 partnership agreement with a First Nation and you got this great development plan. You need to take the time to build those relationships, do so with intention, and make sure that they're mutually beneficial and that you're actually being invited to the table.
Yeah, you only move at the speed of trust, right?
Yeah.
Crystal, Jamie, any thoughts on that one?
Well, assuming you're ready, which is a very important point that Sarah's made, I would suggest, and again, coming from the perspective of a sort of a large corporate mindset, assuming you're ready and you're open to have meaningful conversations and build meaningful relationships with Indigenous communities, clients, whoever your customers for your business are, a good way to start is to start with the neighboring communities that are around where you operate, where your operations are, where your offices are. Learn a bit about those communities before you reach out, and reach out for a meeting. It's as simple as asking for a meeting, and make it easy for those communities to engage with you. My clients loathe coming into Toronto. They don't want to come here. We're not having meetings when I'm in their community. They want us to come to them. So you have to make the offer to go to them. When you go to them, take them something meaningful as a gift for being welcomed into the community. If you're hosting the meeting, please have food. Indigenous people like to build relationships over food. If you don't have food, it is not going to go well. Okay?
It's true.
That is my advice to you.
And enough. Make sure you have enough.
A lot of food. And have takeout containers for when the meeting is finished, because we also don't like to waste food, and people will ask to pack it up. So,
exactly. Crystal?
I think you both said it really well. I think of it, similar to Jamie's point, is it's It's a trade, right? Tradesmanship is, you come, we bring something, you bring something. It's a potlatch. So I think sometimes a mistake that can be made is, oh, I want to hire people, or oh, I want to, do this deal with you. But that's really not how you're going to win in business. It's what can I do for you? It's spending the time to listen, break bread, not talk business first. Talk about where you're from, your connections to the land, who you are as a person, who your family is, who your ancestors are. Those are the most important things, I think, when you're engaging in dialogue. Is it's not business first, which I think we sometimes forget, is that we want to know who you are, what communities you come from, and that's, I think, the way to win in business is to start with the human approach.
Yeah, I often compare it to dating. When you make it really personal, people seem to understand that. Like, by and large, when you're out there cruising around for your life partner, you're going out on a lot of dates with them first, generally speaking, aside from some exceptions. The proposal doesn't happen on the first date, right? You're gonna show up and share a meal, bring a lot of food, find out what's important to them, show up with flowers or chocolates or whatever, the case may be, maybe a fancy car, I don't know, whatever you can afford. The point is that it's a relationship. You have to get to know one another. And then through that, you'll start to understand one another, and that can only lead to a strengthened relationship and partnership. We are at time. I feel like the conversation can go on. There's a few other good questions that I didn't get to here. That said, I'm sure the panelists here would be happy to hear from you, not to inundate your inboxes, but we're always happy to continue the conversation with you all. Thanks so much. I speak on behalf of the room. Brilliance as usual. Thanks so much for imparting your knowledge.
Agreed. I wish I could let this go for a really long time, but I think people would start leaving, and it's usually my commitment to be done at 1:30, but I'm so glad to have you here. On behalf of the Canadian Club Toronto, thank you to Crystal and Jamie and Sarah for a compelling, compassionate discussion about such an important topic, one that needs to be addressed with increasing regularity and import. We appreciated the examples you shared and the leadership you are providing to advance Canada's reconciliation efforts in the corporate sector. It is not a stretch goal to imagine a scenario where profitability and Indigenous values and practices can coexist. So I think we all feel a little bit better about that possibility today. So we admire your efforts to deepen understanding and action, and I think you have inspired us to contribute to this important effort today and moving forward. So please accept our best wishes for success in your respective leadership roles. And Karen, thank you for skillfully moderating this discussion and creating this discussion. We appreciate all you do for the club and Canada. So thank you all again. So before we conclude, I'd briefly highlight some of our upcoming events. On June 12th, we welcome the CEO of TELUS, Darren Entwistle. On June 13th, we're going to hear from Minister Seamus O'Regan sharing the latest from the Ministry of Labour and Senior Citizens. And June 17th, in the evening, we are holding our annual Pride event with a conversation about the work of the Rainbow Railroad and LGBTQ+ persecution around the world. So we really hope you can join us. You can find out more at canadianclub.org. I'd like to thank our AV supplier for quickly changing out lights and always being on their toes, VVC Live. And one more thanks to Agnico Eagle for their sponsorship today and attendance today. Members and guests, thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. We appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.